My colleague Kathy Bush and I probably had the shortest commute to get here. We crossed the street from the Hancock Building, where Christie's has been located since 1997. We've been in the Midwest since 1981. Christie's itself has been around since 1766, so we predate the United States by 10 full years. And we have had a long history of celebrity sales. Following the death of Madame de Pompadour in the 18th century, we quickly ran in, scooped up the jewels, and sold them. More recently, in my own career, we've worked on Yves Saint Laurent, which in 2009, we still raised almost $500 million at that auction as the financial crisis mounted. And I am a recovering lawyer. I was a criminal prosecutor, and someone once said, well, you still deal with the dead, but now they die of natural causes and hopefully have pretty things. So, but it has stood me in good stead. It's been great fun. Today, this will be the case study portion of the evening, and we're going to look at, here it is, the Rockefeller Auction is coming up. Here is Peggy and David Rockefeller. And if there was ever a case of where passion and doing good coincided, this is a wonderful case. It's going to be sold very soon. The catalog's just dropped. The preview will start in New York, April 28th, with sales to commence on May 7th. And it's a wonderful example of philanthropy, philanthropy almost by genetic drip. We have generations of philanthropy. The Rockefellers, were in that famous song, Putting on the Ritz, Let's Mix, where Rockefellers walk with sticks. But they themselves, if they didn't live modestly, they certainly lived circumspectly. And they always had in the back of their minds the idea that they, to whom great things have been given, great things are expected. And they've believed this since the 19th century. The University of Chicago, Rockefeller University, Mount Desert Island, Acadia National Park in Maine, all dozens and dozens of philanthropic causes have been lucky enough to benefit from their largesse. So this is projected to be the largest charity auction ever held. These folks inherited and acquired on a vast scale. And we have here a picture of Peggy and David, who had a very happy marriage. It was probably also a bit of a merger. They both, of course, came from very affluent families, and they were able to indulge their collecting interests. I was lucky enough to meet David Rockefeller while he was still alive. A couple of years ago in Maine, he was coming out of a little club, still very bright, and like Carla, I too am a member of the boomer generation, and when he said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, young man," imagine how happy I was to hear that. Of course, he was roughly twice my age and already north of 100. So, but this family, this auction is going to be a perfect storm of connoisseurship and doing good. Here we have 3 generations of giving. John D. Rockefeller Sr., of course, who was behind the University of Chicago. John D. Rockefeller Jr., and his wife, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, among other things, behind MoMA and the Colonial Williamsburg, the restoration of Williamsburg in the 20s, and David Rockefeller himself. And you can see kind of tucked behind the podium there. Here it is again, family tree. That's David in his mother's arms, and John D. Sr. sitting next to his daughter-in-law, and John D. Jr. in the back. So charitable beneficiaries. The auction, which comprises days and days of sales, both live and online, the contents of their homes on East 65th Street in Manhattan, in Westchester County, and the house in Seal Harbor in Maine. There is enough there. Think of the quantity, 500 Oriental rugs. We'll have 80 porcelain complete dinner services. In case anyone wants one, come see Kathy or me later. There's a lot to sell, but 100% of the sale will go to fulfill testamentary bequests. So, and I will read these to you because the print's a little small. And forgive me, the interns love printing tiny font, I've decided, because they're millennials and they're out to get us. But they make all this possible. So you see things, talk about communities. Peggy Rockefeller, perhaps surprisingly, was a great fan of preserving American farmland. And I think here in Illinois, any of us who have to drive out to DeKalb now to see a cornfield can relate. development has been rampant in this country. It has destroyed beautiful landscapes throughout the country, and Peggy Rockefeller, starting in the 1980s, was behind the American Farmland Trust. That'll be one of the beneficiaries. The America Society, Council of the Americas. This will foster communication and cooperation within the private sector across North and South America. The Council on Foreign Relations. David Rockefeller joined the CFR in 1941. He was a chair for a very long time, 1970 to 1985. The David Rockefeller Fund, established by David and Peggy in 1984. The bottom one, of course, it's Harvard University, David's alma mater, will also benefit. The Maine Coast Heritage Trust. If any of you have had a chance to get up to Acadia or Mount Desert Island, you've seen that pristine beauty, that absolutely untouched landscape. That, in very large measure, is due to the generosity of the Rockefellers. The Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Rockefeller University in New York City, and the Stone Barns Restoration Corporation, which was founded by David in 2001 in Peggy's memory, who predeceased him. So they followed their passions, they followed their communities. These, of course, there have been other very, very fortunate recipients of their largesse in the past, but these are the 12 that are going to get they're going to divide the proceeds from the auctions next month. How do they do it? You know, when I started in the business almost 19 years ago, almost 15 years at Christie's, we were always told, buy what you love and don't buy for investment's sake. And it was almost a dirty little secret to think that people were actually speculating in art and trying to flip things for appreciation. And the Rockefellers clearly were very, very old school. They bought things because they loved them. They were widely traveled. David's parents were going to China as early as 1921 to help fund a hospital there. And so they were exposed to a vast array of cultures and artistic forms of expression. So they were open to a great deal. They also, however, had very, very good advice. So when David's mother, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, was starting the Museum of Modern Art, this was the first director, Alfred Barr. So I think the best bit of advice you can give a budding art collector, whether or not they ever hope to see a return or just for the pure love of collecting, I think it's a fair bit of advice today to seek out the very best counsel you can get, and a museum director is one of them. Here you see some wonderful works now in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. This is a wonderful work, and another rule that our chairman emeritus, Stephen Lash at Christie's, always said, he said, Steve, tell your clients don't buy art on vacation. So, I mean, if you go to one of those little hokey souvenir shops and you've got an hour to kill, you know, before the buffet starts back at the hotel, don't buy anything because it will very rarely appreciate. This, however, is an exception. We have here Paul Klee's wonderful painting, and we are showing it in our gallery across the street. It just arrived this morning, it's installed, and it's part of a preview we're showing in the Hancock Center for the next week. This Paul Klee was once owned by Mies van der Rohe, so that's why those buildings are there on the left. And the Rockefellers, they traveled, as I said, and they were on vacation with the Nyarkos family, who heard tell of an auction in Stuttgart. So they all climbed into a private plane, and David and Peggy Rockefeller came out with a Paul Klee, among many other wonderful works. So this painting is now back on view. It's going to be sold for approximately $400,000 to $600,000, and right now it's hanging about a block from where it originally hung in Mies' own apartment on Pearson Street. Here's another wonderful work. This picture of Mr. Rockefeller in his library on East 65th Street. You can sense from the comparison and juxtaposition the scale of this Picasso. It's an incredibly rare Rose period Picasso, young girl with basket of flowers, and it has that tantalizing description estimate on request. So this, when it comes up, always gets the blood racing. But they think this will bring somewhere in the range of $90 to $120 million. So, and one thing to remember is that auction estimates are marketing tools that are geared at a conservative level in order to stoke up the bidding. So it'll be very interesting to see what this will bring. The Rockefellers didn't pay nearly that much. These things, they were very much in the old school of buy and hold. So they bought things to live with. They were not speculators. And so this had a very happy place in the library on East 65th Street for decades. What next? Another Chicago connection here. This wonderful Matisse, believed to be the best example still left in private hands. This was once owned by Chicago's own Marion Lee Block. Mr. Block was the chairman of the board of the Art Institute of Chicago and was the founder. That's the Marion Lee Block Museum up on Northwestern's campus in Evanston. Another estimate on request, but this one they think at the more accessible price point of 70 to 90 million. So, what tied all this together? It's a wonderfully harmonious collection. And they loved living with their art. We have wonderful porcelain ducks here at $8,000 to $12,000. There's also an amazing array of wooden American duck decoys that were on display in the house in Maine and the house in Westchester. So David Rockefeller once said, in his view, and he wrote a wonderful memoir that I would recommend to all of you, in his view, it was all about quality. Things of various cultures and periods can mix beautifully if they all are of high quality. Again, this one is a clear reflection of Peggy Rockefeller's love of the rural landscape. This is a Charles Schuyler, a modernist work. There are wonderful American paintings in the collection, and this was estimated at $1 million to $1.5 million. Charles Schuyler's works come up very rarely. And so this speaks to the love of preserving farmland, and we are very hopeful that this will do very well indeed. Again, this a wonderful photograph in their collection that also harkens back to their love of the landscape. And not only Mount Desert Island or Acadia National Park, David's funding helped in whole or in part to establish the Grand Tetons, parts of Yellowstone, expanding a lot of our national park system. So these works, everything they lived in, spoke to their passion and spoke to their philanthropy. A very rare and very large Monet, also estimate on request. And this has recently, they wondered, my goodness, Monet is such an old-fashioned artist. Why were the Rockefellers so drawn to this? Well, in fact, Alfred Barr, the man I showed you earlier in that photo from the Museum of Modern Art, he pointed out, as Monet in the last periods of his life was becoming more and more abstract, and he feels like that this work really is sort of an opening a transition towards abstract expressionism, and the Rockefellers were very open to that transition. So, estimate on request, possibly $50 to $70 million. Now we're going to look a little bit at some of those 80 part porcelain dinner services. This is the one that Napoleon took into exile with him on the island of Elba, because you really might want to throw a party on a vast scale while you're plotting your return. Do you remember that old palindrome? Able was I ere I saw Elba. Well, this is what he took. This is a Sèvres French porcelain dinner service, and there are more like it. But it's an exquisite thing, and so we're thrilled to death that this is coming up. Please come see that Klee along with some other works at Christie's, and it will open. I'm sorry we can only scratch the surface. Jennifer is giving me the signal. She's getting the giant hook out, but this is a reminder. It's an investment that can do good, and not all of us can be Rockefellers, but all of us can have fun while we're investing in art. Thank you very much.